Hello, good evening. Welcome to the New York Society Library. My name is Sarah Holliday. I'm here from the library staff. Hey, and I am just here briefly to say welcome and mention a couple of points of business. As we begin, we acknowledge that the library stands on traditional lands of the Lenape people and other indigenous peoples to whom we offer gratitude and respect at this time. If you're new to the New York Society Library, we were founded in 1754. And as New York City's oldest cultural institution, we're proud to continue as a fully independent library with a thriving community of readers, writers, and families. In addition to our large collection of books and other materials, beautiful reading spaces, children's library, and other services, we offer a full season of events with authors and other presenters. So do take a look at what's coming up. And if I can ask you to make sure that cell phones or anything that might disrupt the presentation is silenced, we appreciate it. We are honored to have Daniel Mark Epstein back with us. I believe his first event here was over 20 years ago on his book, Lincoln and Whitman, Parallel Lives in Civil War, Washington, D.C. And it was great to have him back last spring for a celebration of the poems of Edna St. Vincent Millay. Now the topic is his brand new, hot off the press, just beautiful collection of poetry, Constellations. And I can't do any better than quote the Washington Post. Epstein is basically a poet of love and celebration. His greatest strengths are wit and tenderness, a kind of energetic muscularity and great technical skill. We do have copies of Constellations for sale, courtesy of our friends from the Independent Corner Bookstore. So please get yours signed after the event. And I am delighted to turn the lectern over to Daniel.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Sarah. It's always so great to be here. I love the library. And I want to thank also Jeanette Watson Sanger for introducing me to the library. She was the one who I think was involved in first inviting me to speak here. And she would like to be with us today, but can't. But sends her best. One doesn't set out to write a book like this. I mean, you don't. You write a poem, and then you write another poem, and you send them out to magazines when you're a teenager, and then you get hundreds of rejection slips, and then finally somebody says yes, and I've been fortunate. I think W.H. Auden said the same thing about his own career. He was fortunate in publishing early and in good places, and that was true. So I was very fortunate. And not only did I have a huge desire to write poems and to publish my poetry, I was fortunate. I was fortunate in having certain people at certain magazines who embraced my work very early on. And I'm going to mention quickly Milton Kramer at the New Criterion, Paula Dietz at the Hudson Review. Although Paula Dietz was probably not in a position to be taken, she's younger than I am, I think. Howard Moss, the late Howard Moss at the New Yorker, who published my work when I was 18. Richard Howard at the Paris Review. Doris Grombach at the New Republic, Carol Bache of the American Scholar. Most of these people are no longer with us, but I do want to honor them as I think back over the years of writing poetry and the people who sustained me during all of those years. So you write a poem, and then you write another poem. Oh, look, let me tell you something that very few people know. I don't think even my wife knows this. I started writing poetry when I was really young, 10, 11 years old. And when I was 12, I entered the Scholastic Writing Contest. Does that still exist? Scholastic was a big deal in the 1950s and 60s. And I was 12 and I entered a poem and I won the prize. And I can't remember what the poem was. Think how long ago that was. I'm 76, I'll be 77 in a few days. So anyway, I've been writing poetry for a long time. So you write a poem, you write another poem, a poem gets published in a magazine, and then if you're lucky in your 20s, really lucky, then you get a publisher. And I was fortunate in having some very, very good publishers in New York. And alas, they're going too. Margot Scott at the Liverite published No Vacancies in Hell in 1973, which is the first volume represented here. And then Peter Mayer, who was a legend in American publishing, published most of the rest of my books. Well, published them all but the last 3 books, which were published by LSU. And I'm grateful to James Long, who's my editor there now, for publishing Constellations. So it's an accretion over many, many years. And I can remember when I was a young poet, and I would look at the collected poems of W.B. Yeats or W.H. Auden and think, wow, that's really wonderful. I didn't really think at that point, well, someday that might happen to me. But I got older and older and older, and there were more and more books, and books started going out of print. And my publisher, LSU, was enthusiastic after my publishing my selected poems for me to publish collected poems. So my select poems was published 10 years ago, and it's about 10 years later that we have Constellations. I'm going to read mostly poems from, well, even before I do that, not only am I grateful for the publishers who published my books, I'm also grateful for the sustenance of friends whose encouragement from the very beginning has been important, because to sustain a career this long, and we're talking about 60 years of writing poetry and having to believe that what I was doing was going to be read and heard. My oldest friend, to whom the book is dedicated, Monsignor Bazan, still alive. He's 10 years older than I am. Book is dedicated to him. Lynn Chase, friend, this room is named for Lynn Chase. Yeah. Friend of poets, good friend of me. Jeanette, I mentioned, my daughter Ruth, who's going to be coming through that door with about 10 people. She's so late. Who else? My wife Sarah, my sons. Without a support network like that, you couldn't keep writing poetry. I couldn't anyway. So I'm mostly going to read poems, the new poems. The book has been under contract for 2 years, so I had a really long time to think about what was, how it was going to be shaped, and to write new poems. So I 50 pages of new poetry in the last 10 years, and I'm mostly going to be reading those poems. The first poem I'm going to read is called The Last Station. Like a traveler seated backward on a train who sees almost nothing until it's passed him by, he's missed his childhood and his children's. His youth is a blur, and middle age an illusion. And what looms large diminishes rapidly to a vanishing point before he can name it. A forest that never occurred as separate trees. A woman waving goodbye at the last station. Meadows and fields bloom and yield so quickly, the season's colors run together. Even the mountains, much greater than the land, bow to lowly hills that fade away into the sky. He nods to the snow that veils all such dimensions so gently, and sleeps, a ghost, adrift in drifting snow. I'm going to read that again, because it's the first poem, and it takes a while. So glad to see you. I have a special poem called Lateness.
Oh, no.
I'm going to read out of order because I thought maybe somebody would be late. So here's a poem called Lateness that was written. This is not a new poem. It's an old poem.
But it's on spot.
Lateness. And then I'm going to go back and read the other poem too. Because the past cannot bear to part with her, the present suffers. So we wait in a lobby, under the eyes of chandeliers, in train stations, on a street corner, and at midnight in the graveyard with a spirit who waited in this world and waits in the next. For her October hair and bright May skin have taken since the beginning of earthly time and will take forever. Time goes with her. Wherever she stops, the moments turn and spin. Little minutes are doves eating out of her hand. But when the hours call, she does not answer. Because her worth is beyond question or value, kings have died for her, and worlds collided. Skies caved in, and hills leapt in the blue. Her touch can melt the ice caps, make buttercups flash in the desert, and wild daisies. Poets have climbed to heaven singing her praises. It isn't for spite she keeps you waiting there at the small end of night's telescope. No, it's not to belittle you with your bruised corsage and trail of crushed cigarettes left behind, your shadow of beard, the useless theater tickets. You are probably the farthest thing from her mind. Maybe a street singer took her by surprise, or a pattern of a scarf. Scarlet and pearl gray made her pause and muse in the window. Then the moon would not let her go until it passed. Maybe later in the street, admiring children circled her on skates and led her away, laughing, into a wide park where it seems her gentle protests failed as she tried on their silver wheels and showed them whirling figures they had seen before only in dreams. Because of this and the endless flattery of twilight, the gay breeze beneath the sad story of each star, she must honor the times that make her beautiful. And the wonder is not that she is late tonight, but that anyone has ever seen her at all. I'm going to reread the first poem, The Last Station. I don't like to sit backward on a train. I like to sit forward, watch things coming out and so you can figure it out. So this is a poem that was written when I was riding backwards. The Last Station. Like a traveler seated backward on a train who sees almost nothing until it's passed him by, he's missed his childhood and his children's. His youth is a blur, and middle age an illusion. And what looms large diminishes rapidly to a vanishing point before he can name it. A forest that never occurred as separate trees. A woman waving goodbye at the last station. Meadows and fields bloom and yield so quickly, the season's colors run together. Even the mountains, much greater than the land, bow to lowly hills that fade away into the sky. He nods to the snow that veils all such dimensions so gently and sleeps, a ghost, adrift in drifting snow. The next poem is called Vision in February. Under the vault of light blue morning sky on an ash gray hill, I saw the image of a horse, gigantic, sinewy neck and flank, and all from mane to hoof clear cut, cast against the broad side of a barn. This shape loomed before I saw the horse standing below, golden, yet trivial. Little was left of winter but bare bones. I missed my parents, long dead, and grieved for my distant children. I saw the shadow of treetop trunks and twigs and crows who looked like shadows before I glimpsed the things that posed for them. Such a brilliant morning in late winter, when I saw the sky's lofty silhouette, I felt like I might ride that shadow into the real world beyond the hill, into fresh wind, midday and early spring, beyond this melting world into the next. Who have I become that I can see the shadow of the horse, the clouds, the tree, man, woman, all things dear to me before I see the living things themselves? Who have I become now that the echo of cries and laughter precedes the living voices? What deep valley has created such a chamber? Years have passed since I was on horseback. Surely time has come for me to mount again and spur the horse to a full gallop, clear that split rail fence in the far field, and leaving this body, fade into the forest. Silverfish. You know what I mean by silverfish? They eat your manuscripts, your books. You must have to deal. Do you have to deal with silverfish?
We try hard not to.
No, this is a good silverfish. There's a hole in this page, the size of an eyelet you poke in cardboard to let the sun and moon slip through so you can view the eclipse without going blind. This is before my alarm. I did not make it. No, the little window was the work of the silverfish. But let's make the most of it, to see and be seen, as if this was our fondest wish. Peering between the lines, now I see you daydreaming, as people do, and no one is watching. It is a God's eye view from where I stand, eternity on either hand, and your face before me in a moment of candid beauty, like the cracked seed of creation from which swirled the unity and variety of the world. So if the book were to have a title poem, it would probably be The Watchman, the next poem I'm going to read. It's It's about the process, think about the process of the shepherds, or whoever it was, figured out the constellations, the constellation that particular shape of star is Orion, and that's his belt, and the Great Bear, and that's the tail, and that's the body. And then I think about the actual myth of Andromeda. Andromeda is, I'm going to tell that story very quickly in the body of the poem. The Watchman. I think of you, Andromeda, and the shepherds who lay on the hilltops, sleepless in love, counting sheep and connecting the dots in heaven as nature tempered the wind to the shorn land. I think of you, blameless beauty, to blame only because others bragged of your beauty. Your mother, the queen, Cassiopeia, comparing both of you to the ravishing sea nymphs. And nothing would appease their jealousy but the Virgin herself, naked, chained to a stone, there to be eaten alive by the sea monster. What happened then? The hero's flashing sword, the girl's tears and shame, his famous words, there will be time enough for weeping, but the time for risk and rescue is all too brief. The serpent slain, his nostrils spouting water and blood. An ancient poet tells it all, and how the bride descended from the rock. But none of this tale is written in the skies. There's nothing but a scattering of lights that if you are half asleep or full of longing, might be taken for a naked woman. Here a gem for an ear, there one for a nipple, a string of jewels for a leg, and the great star where thighs meet, Beta Andromedae. I think of the genius of those guardians who in their loneliness drew on the sky. Few watchmen now have shepherd's crooks. All of the visible stars are accounted for. I think of the mortal patience that made the constellations long ago, and the immortal patience that made the stars. I think that most of my poems are made up, fictional, but once in a while, something will happen. Actually, there's several poems in this section I'm going to be reading today that things really did happen. This poem is all true, every word of it. Memorial Day, May 25th, 2020. I never met Timothy Clover and wondered for years if I had made him up. Think of that name, Timothy Clover. Timothy Clover. I never met Timothy Clover and wondered for years if I'd made him up, if my memory had played a trick on me, or if he had made himself up like a phoenix. He published a poem in our high school literary magazine when I was a sophomore, and then vanished without a trace of his existence, apart from the name. What's in a name? In this case, it seems like the perfect poet's name, or the name for the perfect poet, Timothy Clover, a fragrant pastoral image like something out of Virgil, a tuneful shepherd or goatherd. If poets are born and not made, this one with such a name was surely born to be a poet. And if the young man made it up, then he was born to make a poet of himself, as most of us struggle to do. Anyway, it was a very big high school, and I never met him or anybody who had. I just remember the evergreen name above the title of a poem and a few lines. Quote, And when she asked me why I was always looking down on these spring days when the sky is so clear and blue, I explained to her that on such days, the sky of May or June looks the same from horizon to horizon as we walk under it, while the ground changes at least 6 times. Timothy Clover wrote that, and I remember it more than half a century ago. That makes it real poetry. Whether the youth himself was real or not was a mystery. I imagined him tall and blond and thin, ethereal like Shelley, his head in the clouds and stars, an ear cocked for the muses who always called on him first. Feet that scarcely touched the earth as he strolled beneath that perfect blue sky of Maryland spring, an astral spirit. But today is Memorial Day, and we're sheltering in place. Walking under the wide sky of May and looking down upon the delicious changing earth beneath my feet, I think of Timothy Clover. Real or made up, fact or fiction. With time on my hands and curiosity and a search engine, I mean to find out. It takes all of 5 minutes online. Lionel Timothy Clover, born January 10th, 1947, died May 22nd, 1968. Vietnam War era casualty, hostile, killed in action, multiple fragmentation wounds, mixed rocket and mortar fire, Tay Ninh province, end quote. In other words, poet was blown to pieces. A few more clicks and then I learned he was drafted, left behind a wife and son, 1 year of age. The day of his death was 5 days after the Catonsville Nine. Priests and poets burned the draft files with homemade napalm. The same spring, Martin Luther King was shot dead on his balcony, and race riots set our cities on fire, and students closed Columbia and the Sorbonne. On his tombstone in Fredericksburg, the inscription reads, quote, Lionel Timothy Clover, poet, lived for peace, forced into war. So he did make it up, the name that is, by deleting his first, Lionel, from the Latin, which means young lion. So this is a poem called Dutch Comfort, Thoughts on a Figure of Speech. I've written several poems about my grandfather, who had great influence on me, and he was Dutch. Well, a man of enormous experience and wisdom. It's a comfort that things are no worse, that the wind that blew out the lights and toppled trees knocked none down on your house. That the storm came on a Sunday when there was no work to be done. A comfort, the cough is not a cold. The cold, not pneumonia. Or if it is not the viral kind that kills. Or if so, it is not you or your beloved that dies, but some stranger or enemy, good riddance, or someone very old whose life is a burden. And if death comes, as it will, even to you, it is a comfort to think that death is easy, a destination longed for, heaven, or a wayside inn with fire on the hearth. A company of old friends before bedtime, or at least a dreamless and untroubled sleep. My grandfather came from the Netherlands, a cabin boy on an English-rigged windjammer, then a master mariner, and as good a man as ever smoked a pipe or swam a mile across the roiling flood of a tidal river. Honest as the day is long, when days were long. No prude or moralist or paragon. He lived as well as he could, let others live, and knew to hang his head when he'd done wrong. So I never understood such figures of speech as Dutch courage, which comes only with gin, or Dutch nightingales for singing frogs, or Dutch music for any kind of racket made by a drunken party where some are singing, some are shouting, fighting, or pounding the table with fists and mugs. How can it be that the nation of Rembrandt and Anne Frank, windmills, dikes, and tulips, and my grandfather became synonymous with all that's false? Some ancient war for mastery of the seas, a feud over trade in pepper, wool, or lace, turned our English tongue against the Dutch. My grandfather taught me how to sing and fish, to play gin rummy, drink a glass of gin, and drive his four-door Ford when I was 10. A Dutchman head to heels in wooden shoes he wore around the house and in the garden. Not the best, not the worst of men. Well, I promised that I would read the pandemic sonnets. Some of you have seen the film. I mean, some people that I'd never met. I've seen the film with Harris Yulin and Tyne Daly and Jennifer. I can't remember all the names, but it's a lovely film. You can see it online. It's 15 sonnets. I'm not going to be able to read them all, but I'll read some of them. Deciding as I go along. These poems were written in a 10-day period during April of 2020, right after the first lockdown orders of the pandemic. This may have happened centuries ago to strangers who told a different tale of pestilence and calamity on a scale thought unthinkable just then as now. The April sun rose darker than a crow, and wind out of the east stirred up a gale that blew out lives like candles, surreal. The song is ancient, tone and tremolo. Listen to me, you stars and daffodils. You are my last and only audience. My voice under the sky, against the hills, ricochets as it seeks true sound and sense in a world gone mad. My worn heart fills with anguish for our blighted innocence. Borisov's comment. A comet blazed unheralded last year. And knowing what we now know, we might well think it was a portent of God's spite in condemning everything that we hold dear. The innocent with the guilty, sincere hearts with the liars and fakes, the outright killers with saints, all equal in his sight. Some think so. It is not my greatest fear. To be invisible, unheard, unknown by those we love, to dwell halfway between here and the hereafter, to drift alone, wide-eyed in the unlit night and blind by day. This is the thought that chills me to the bone and makes the scourge of God seem like child's play. Virtual reality. The restaurants, bars, and barbers have shut down. Theater, stadium, and concert hall are dark and vacant. An ominous pall has settled upon the country and the town. The tightrope walker and the circus clown wilt in quarantine. Schools and colleges all are closed, and learning is virtual. The bride is virtual. So is the wedding gown. The flight is canceled. Train stalled in the station. And everyone in public wears a mask. Not just the bandit, the nurse and surgeon. You will not see the stranger's face. Don't ask. Things will be done remotely done, in a virtual world that takes real life to task. The next poem was read by Time Daily, and I encourage you to go to just Google my name and Google April, and I'll try to do as well as she did. Suppose the time had come. Suppose the time had come for me to die, and death had picked the hour, if not the cause. Headache struck, high fever, and the jaws of double pneumonia wrung my lungs awry. You might call the ambulance, and I would be kidnapped by men in masks because of this pandemic and the civil laws that spare no time for lovers to say goodbye. No room in the emergency room for friends, sons or daughters, husbands and wives. No space in intensive care for the comfort of holding hands or beholding once and for all a beloved face. For you and me, this might be the way it ends. Each of us dying alone in a strange place. I'm going to read one more of these, which is not on the film. And then I'm going to read one other poem, and then we'll take some questions. A drinking song. So this is new. No one's ever heard this. No one's ever seen it. A drinking song. Shakespeare is dead, and so is the Dead Sea. There is a time and place for everything. Lincoln is dead, his horse, and Warren Harding. Caesar and Marilyn and John Kennedy have joined the chorus, Elvis and Otis Redding. The king is dead also. Long live the king. Maybe the hour has come for you and me. My parents are dead, and many of my friends have paid the debt, checked out, gone to glory. There are few beginnings left me, no end of ends. The song is simple, and I sing it simply. There is time to sing and time to bow to silence. Maybe the hour has come for you and me. One more poem. This is Helen. Oh, it's amazing the kind of thoughts that can occur to you when you're putting together 60 years of poems. And most of the poems of this book have been published at least 4 times. First in a magazine and then in different books and sometimes in anthologies. This has been published more than that. Helen, tell us a love story, pleaded the class in chorus. Our lessons are all done. Now don't lecture or bore us, they prattled, except for one. Helen, whose gaze looked lost in the maze of willow branches, the girl the boys liked most, with the faraway blue of her eyes and brown hair straight as rain. Tell us a love story, please, they begged the teacher again. He frowned and longed for the bell, saying, all the love stories I know end in heartache or death. Then Helen, from the back row, called at last from her daydream in the voice of an innocent lover, tell us a love story anyway, and stop before it's off. So I'll take questions.
Inspired you when you were 10 years old.
My mother read poetry to me, and I think, as long as I was recently giving I was giving a lecture on Aristotle yesterday, and I'm teaching a course for my sins. I hadn't taught in 15 years, but they made me an offer. I got confused. So I was lecturing on Aristotle, and he talks about imitation. He's teaching the poetics. Tragedy is imitation of an action, and we learn by imitation. And my mother read me poetry, and that's how I learned to talk, I guess. So I think I was writing. I can't remember when I started writing poetry. It seems like I'm always written poetry. And I think that, the inspiration first was just wanting to make sounds, and just the joy of. I take the same joy in writing poetry that people take in singing, the birds take in singing. It's just always been something emerge. And then later it was thoughts and ideas, all those things. But first it was just the sensual joy of speaking beautiful vowels and consonants for it. Yes.
What are some of the times you spent with your grandfather who was so influential?
Well, my grandparents lived in a little town called Vienna on the eastern shore of Maryland. And it was a beautiful really a fishing village. And we lived in the city, in the suburbs of Washington. And the contrast between the two cultures was huge. And it wasn't that I was unhappy living in Washington suburbs, but it was so beautiful in Vienna, Maryland. And my grandfather, he worked in the power plant, but he loved. He had a garden in his. He was a really good gardener, and he raised all sorts of vegetables, and a great fisherman. And swimmer, and he was very wise. And he was a 33rd degree Mason, which meant a lot. Probably still does. And just he taught me what it was to live a good life, and be a good person and be generous. It's a great question. I could talk for hours about it. I'll read you hours of poems. Sarah?
What other poets do you like to read, maybe earlier in your life and then now? And who are maybe some younger poets that you read now?
Yeah, that's a really great. Always hard to talk to an old poet about younger poets. It's hard to keep up. When I was in my 40s and 50s, I made a real effort to keep up with my contemporaries. And now, because I've not been an academic. My career has been as a writer and not an academic. If you asked somebody who'd been teaching poetry, they'd probably have better answers. Rita Dove is somebody I greatly admire. She's young, she's a little bit younger than I am. Gertrude Schnackenberg, I don't know if you know her poetry, you should. Sharon Olds, not my cup of tea, but a really, really strong poet who's stuff I keep up with. But mostly I've read, my models were William Butler Yeats, Robert Browning, Chaucer. I really made my reputation in the 70s not by writing lyric poetry, but by writing long, dramatic, and narrative poems, which are in this book. I mean, they don't lend themselves to this sort of situation. But one of the reasons why this book exists after my selected poems is because there's enough room here to publish this dramatic monologues. Shakespeare, I've also written a lot of plays. Most of the plays are in verse. Yes.
You were reading for about half an hour, but if you were giving some evening like this and you didn't have your book and there were no books, could you simply recite your poems for half an hour, or do you have to look at them?
I have to look at them. There's some of them that I've committed to memory. And when I was younger and I hadn't written so many poems, then I probably could have, I don't know, about 40. By the way, I was timing when I read for 45 minutes, right?
Something like that.
It's 45 minutes. And if you thought it was only a half hour, that's terrific. That's terrific. Because if it seems like less, no, it was 45 minutes. I would have read. That was great.
On average, how many drafts do you go through?
Oh, wow. That sometimes hundreds. I mean, occasionally there are poems, like I wrote the pandemic sonnets, which by the Petrarchan sonnets, they're technically not an easy thing to do. And I wrote them in 10 days. So those, but that was, after a lifetime of writing poetry, at a certain point you internalize technique. But I also have a poem, I have a longer poem, which is a long love poem, that took me 10 years to write. And I don't know, 100 drafts, 150 drafts. It just depends on the complexity of the not so much the form at this point, that's not a problem. Complexity of the ideas that I'm trying to convey. Because if it doesn't seem like a moment's thought, which is close to a line from Yeats, it should seem like it didn't take any time away. But I would say that with most of the poems, it's 10, 15, 20 drafts. Sure.
Those pandemic poems, and there's something inherently playful about having to manipulate the complexity of sonnets. And do you think that was a reaction to just how dreary and dreadful that period was?
Come in.
So they had.
You're just
I
here, sit here.
I'm sorry.
No, it wasn't. It was the reason I chose that form of the Petrarchan sonnet as opposed to the Shakespearean sonnet is I wanted something that would challenge me technically in order to. Actually, playful is a kind of an interesting word. It really is, because I wanted something that would be strict enough so that I would not be overwhelmed by the emotions that I was writing about. Because those poems, if you read all 15 of them, I mean, they're wrenching, they were very wrenching for me to write. So in order for me to get sort of objectivity that I want when I'm writing poetry, because If Sharon Olds were here right now, she would be saying a very different thing about writing. She's not interested in being, she wants to tell her story as rawly as possible. I'm much more in the kind of classical tradition of Eliot, trying to get myself as far removed from it as I can in order to capture the emotion in a more objective way, or to put it in the put it into other people. But I definitely chose the sonnet in order to give me a little bit of distance. Yes.
Yeah, tying into the question about the drafts and everything, when you're in the process of doing all that, do you read out loud? Because I find poetry is meant to be, you know, I mean, you're a playwright also, plays obviously are written to be performed, not to be read.
Yeah, I would say that, you know, my inner ear now has become developed to a point where I don't, you know, Sarah, do you hear me? No, but sometimes I will. Yeah, sometimes I'll read, you know, read a stanza aloud to make sure that it sounds the way I want it to.
Yeah.
Yes.
Sort of back to his question and what you were talking about, form, do you start with I want to talk about this, then figure the form, or do you want to write a sonnet and figure what's that going to be about? How does that sort of work?
The form follows the content. The content. I mean, I feel, you know, first of all, I feel what I'm going to write, and the pandemic sonnets is kind of an unusual structure because there's 15 of them. So pretty early on, I had to figure out, okay, I'm going to do it in this way. But ordinarily, I'll start out writing. If it's going to be a 30 or 40 line poem, I won't really know the stanza length until I've been working through the sentences. I'll figure out the line, that the line's going to have approximately, you know, 5 stresses or 6 stresses or 4 stresses. And then as I'm working through the draft, you know, through the different drafts, I'll figure out what the stanza length is going to be. And as I've gotten older, that's gotten more consistently to be a certain kind of stanza. Depending on the kind of poem, it'll be a 6-line stanza. A lot of the I think the better, longer poems here are 8-line stanzas, which is really comfortable. But the form always follows the content. Yes.
No, go ahead.
How did you decide on doing the Cruel April film rather than reading the poems yourself, which you do very well? You chose to have actors read the different poems in that.
I had a lot of help with that. After I wrote the poems, remember we were all very isolated. I was sending them out to a lot of different friends, and one of my really good friends, Holly Pepe, who edited she edited so many of Edna St. Vincent Millay's things. She and I had been collaborators for many years, and she's also something of an agent and a producer. I think it was Holly who read the poems and said, you know what, we really should make a film out of this. And nobody's working, everybody is sheltering in place. I might be able to get Thai daily. And I said, go ahead. And she also knew this producer, Douglas Trapp, who, I don't know, produced videos, and works on advertising, and he was willing to direct it. And we got we got 4 really first-rate actors to work for free. Everybody just donated their time and recorded the things in their homes. And I mean, it really was an extraordinary thing that only could have happened during that time. We could never have gotten those people to do that. And it's an incredible film. A lot of artwork by these different artists from Tivoli Gallery in New York. Yes.
I went to the Robert Moses,
What?
I went to the Robert Moses exhibit at the New York Historical Society and was really struck by his method of writing and his routines and the structure of the office and the typewriter and the notes and pinning everything up and having a little tracker for how many words he wrote each day. What is your method like? Is it something that's routine and consistent in that way, or does it vary by place or season?
But I would say it varies according to the project, because I've written, I mean, the poetry's been the main thing in my life, but I've probably spent more hours altogether writing nonfiction. You know, I've made my living as a historian and biographer, and I've written a lot of biographies. But when I'm doing that, I get up every day, go to the office, and work 3-4 hours. I do usually keep track of how many words that I write. Seems to be helpful. It's really a routine thing, but it is with the poems too. When I decide that I have a poem that needs to be written, that I really, you know, I'm really inspired and I'm really ready to work on it. I work on it the same way. I get up in the morning and I work as long as I can on it. And then I stop. Usually 3 hours. Poetry is much more intense. Poetry is much more intense and draining and demanding than writing prose. It's not easy. I mean, none of this is easy, but writing poetry is much more demanding, psychically demanding, intellectually, in every way you can imagine. So a good day of writing poetry might be 2 hours. But I, you know, on really good days when I was writing prose and knew what I was doing, I could work maybe 5 hours. But it's every day, and it's always in the morning. I'm no good at afternoon. Yes.
How do you know when it's finished?
When I can't make it any better. Yeah. And if it's a failure, I'll stop at some point because I just think this is never going to work. You know, I worked on it long enough, it just isn't working. But usually it's, I think it was some French poet, Valéry, said poems are not finished, they're abandoned. So at a certain point, you've done everything you can possibly do and you can't make it better. That's really what makes this possible, because otherwise I'd be going back rewriting these old. I can't rewrite them, you know, that's pretty neat. I mean, 40-year-old poems that I can't, there's nothing I can do to that. I just have to print it. Okay, thank you very much. You're doing great.